Because they occupy a place at the middle of an argument, connecting the claim and the evidence, inferences are crucial to our ability to critically think about ideas and analyze the strength of those ideas. In fact, we can start the critical thinking process simply by asking, do we want to accept the inference for a particular argument? So let's look at an example that will hopefully help demonstrate how analyzing the inference helps us do critical thinking. So the example is, if somebody were to argue the following: we have outlawed dogfights because our society is against cruelty to animals. Just look at what happened to Michael Vick. Rodeo animals by nature are not aggressive, but they are poked by electric prods and other devices to incite the behavior rodeo fans enjoy. We must outlaw rodeos like we have done with other so-called sports that are cruel. What we really have here is an analogy argument. We're comparing rodeos to sports like dogfighting. And so that brings with it some inferences, and we need to ask, are we willing to accept those inferences? Because if we can go through an inference and say, yeah, that's a strong point, I agree with that, I accept it, then we're more likely to come away with a good, solid argument. So what are some of the inferences in this example? Well, there's one, that animal cruelty is wrong. Essentially, we're assuming that the reason we've outlawed things like dogfighting is because our society has come to the conclusion that animal cruelty is wrong, and things that encourage it need to be banned. And I think that this inference is probably pretty solid. There aren't too many people who would argue that animal cruelty is okay. We've worked through this as a society, and we've come to agreement that animal cruelty is not a good thing. But there are some other inferences here. Because this is an analogy, and we're comparing rodeos to dogfighting, we've got to ask ourselves, does this comparison really work? Are rodeos equal to dogfighting? In other words, is the cruelty that we see in dogfighting the same kind of entertainment that we see in rodeos? Now, here's an inference that will probably get some objections, because the nature of these two things that are being compared isn't entirely the same. So as a result, we may have an inference that needs some work. It doesn't necessarily mean that we totally discard our argument. We may come to a conclusion later that this problem in the analogy is so big that we can't reconcile it, and then we can discard the idea. But the fact that we've identified a problem with the inference just suggests that we have something that we need to work on. And then there's another inference here, and that is that cattle prods are cruel. And this sort of gets at the analogy between rodeos and dogfighting as well, because the question is what's happening in a rodeo equivalent to cruelty that we see in dogfighting? So again, we have another inference that may get some objections, and as a result, it suggests that we have to work a little bit more on this argument. Now, as I said, just because there are problems with the inference doesn't necessarily mean that we need to throw out the argument, but it does mean that we need to work on it. And that's how we engage critical thinking, by looking at the inference.